Kia ora Rae te whānau. Keep talking amongst yourselves, we're just sorting out a few technical difficulties. Nā reira, kei te whare a tēnā koutou katoa. He hono re, he karoria ki te atua, he maungārungu ki te whenua, he whakaro pai ki ngā tāngata katoa. E te atua nei mātou e whakawhetai atu, e whakamoimiti atu ana ki a koe, mō tō manaakitanga ki rungi a mātou. A tō aroha ki rungi a Rae, ki a tai ora mai ai ki konei. Aha koa, te riri o tāwhiri mātea, kua tau pai mai ai. Ki o tautahi nei. Nō reira e te atua a pai Māori ai. Whakaria mai, tori beka ki au, ti aho mai, raro E te iwi tēnei te mihi maioha ki a tātou e rauika mai nei uraro te tuanui o tō tātou nei whare. I runga i te mana o te kauhau a tau o Graham Nuthall. Nō reira kei ngā maunga whakahi, kei ngā watipua, kei ngā wakatūpuna e tau mai nei, rau rangatira mā, ngā manuhiri Tūhourangi, a tēnā kōtau, malolelei, talofa lava, kia oranga, namaste, pulavinaka. Te kaupeka ako, the Faculty of Education, in partnership with the Graham Nuthall Classroom Research Trust, is proud to present the annual Graham Nuthall Lecture. I would like to acknowledge Graham's wife, Jill, and daughter, Robin, for ensuring that his legacy remains alive. Nō reira, tēnā kōtuna. My name is Te Hurinui Karaka Clark. I am the Acting Head of School of Teacher Education at the University of Canterbury, and it is my privilege to MC the 2023 Graham Nuthall Lecture. However, before we go any further, health and safety. In the unlikely event that we have to evacuate the premises, please use your nearest emergency exit, which are there or up the back. If it's an earthquake, please remain where you are until the building stops shaking, and then make your way to your nearest exit. The assembly point, once you exit the building, is a grass area just outside on the left-hand side. Because the lecture is going to be reasonably quick, I don't anticipate anyone needing to use wharepaku. However, should you need to, just go out the closest exit and you'll find wharepaku in the foyer area where you are enjoying drinks and nibbles. Graham Nuthall is credited with the longest series of studies of teaching and learning in the classroom that has ever been carried out, and it has been recognised by the educational research community. A pioneer in his field, his research focused on the intimate relationship among students and teachers within the classroom, resulting in a deeper understanding of the significant and often very subtle classroom interactions which influence learning. After completing his PhD at the University of Illinois, he returned to UC and was made a professor at the young age of 37. I can't wait till I get to 37. His work was published in many international journals, including the Harvard Educational Review. He won many awards, including the New Zealand Science and Technology Medal from Tūhourangi, the Royal Society. In 2003, he was made a member of the New Zealand Order of Merit for services to education. Graham said, "My vision is that we will be able to produce a deep understanding of how pupils experience classroom activities and how their minds are shaped by those experiences. This deep understanding will provide teachers with a basis on which they can plan effective learning activities that will match the needs and interests of their pupils. It will provide them with the understanding they need to monitor on a moment-by-moment basis what their pupils are learning or not learning, understanding or misunderstanding." Tonight's guest will bring that vision to life for us. Dr. Rae Si ilata, Ngāti Raukawa, Tūhourangi, Fiji, my sister. As Director of atele Education Consulting, is contracted to deliver Ministry of Education PLD and research contracts to ECE and primary education sectors. Two current projects are the Pasifika Early Literacy Project and the Pasifika Teacher Aid Project, which focus on supporting centre, school leaders, teachers and learning assistants to privilege and utilise linguistically and culturally sustaining, revitalising pedagogies within their learning spaces. My sister Rae, Tūhourangi, worked most recently as a senior lecturer for 15 years at the University of Auckland, supporting practising teachers of postgraduate bilingualism, biliteracy study, and is now an honorary academic at Te Puna Wānanga in the Faculty of Education and Social Work, University of Auckland. Since 2020, she has also worked at Te Whare Wānanga Awanui Ārangi in the School of Indigenous Graduate Studies, supporting Māori and Pacific Tauira in their Indigenous doctoral journeys. It is no surprise to me, given Rae's whakapapa, that she has reached such esteemed heights. And I could go on all night about her whakapapa, but tonight's not about me, it is about Rae and the topic that she has up there. Please join me in welcoming Rae to the stage.
Ai, te mea tuatahi, karoria ki tō tātou mātua nui te rangi, te mea tuarua, kia koutou katoa. Te mea tuarua ki ngā mana whenua o tēnei rohe, kia ngai tahu, tēnā koutou, ki o koutou maunga, ki o koutou awa, ki o koutou marae, tēnā koutou katoa. Te mea tuarua ki te whānau o Graham Nuthall, kia Jill, kia Robin, tēnā kōrua, ngā mihi aroha kia kōrua. Ki te kai kōrero, ki te kai karakia, i te pōnei, tēnā koe e te rangatira. Ngā mihi aroha kia koe, mō ngā kupu a tāhua i te pōnei. Ai, I have missed anybody. Well, I've got quite a few slides, but we'll just see how we go. If you're starting to fall asleep, let me know, and I'll cut it short. So just on this initial slide here, I'll just take it back, is a picture of a atele by Herb Kawainui Kane. And it's the atele, or in te reo Māori we say wakahaurua, which is the double-hulled deep-sea canoe in Leo Whakatonga, the Tongiaki, in Wasawakaviti, Wangandrua. And so it was the double-hulled deep-sea canoe that our tupuna sailed te moana nui a Kiwa and came here to Aotearoa. And so I used the atele, or the double-hulled deep-sea canoe, as a metaphor in my doctoral work. And I don't really have time to talk about that specifically tonight, but you might just be wondering why that picture is there. It's the picture that's in my doctorate, and it's the metaphor. It's a metaphor for Pasifika success. And I've always said our Pasifika tamariki are sailing in a double-hulled waka, not a single-hulled waka. And for them to be truly successful as who they are, they need to be successful in both the world of home and the world of school. And, you know, thankfully those worlds are beginning to come a little bit closer together. But when I wrote that thesis, they were still pretty far apart. So the two hulls represent those two worlds. And that, you know, we really need to critically ask that question, what constitutes success for Pasifika learners? I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, so ko waiaho, and I think I don't need to go into detail because my tuakana has provided that for you, but I'll just say, ki te taho tōku mātua, he uri ahau no Ngāti Raukawa, no Tūhourangi, ko tararua te maunga, te pai maunga, ko otaki, ko ohau ngā awa, ko tainui, ko te arawa ngā waka, ko kikopiri te marae me te hapu. Ki te taha o tōku whaia, he uri ahau no Fiji, Fiji, no Savusavu, no Vanua Levu. Ki te taha o tōku hoa rangatira, me aku tamariki, kei te hono ahau ki ha moa, me tonga, me tokelau. He fruit salad ahau. So in my whānau, and at the moment I think there's probably more than 10 people living in my whare and mangere, and we have te reo Māori, we have ngangana Samoa, we have ngangana tokelau, we have Leo Whakatonga, and English, you know, so we're all kind of fighting for airtime for our reo, and just, you know, this is the first year I've had mokopuna, and that's my dream for my mokopuna, to become multilingual. Ai, malo ni, taloha ni. I'm a bit behind. So, actually, this was the mihi that I wanted to give to Jill, and and also acknowledging Professor Graham Nuthall, Dean of the faculty. Thank you. And I looked on your website and you have the 3 kete of knowledge. You have that as an image there. And you know, those kete, they represent sacred knowledge, ancestral knowledge, life's knowledge. So I just hope that I'm going to add to your kete a little bit tonight. And I want to really thank you for the honour of being asked to deliver this lecture this year. I was initially asked back in 2021, and then COVID was with us, so it's really lovely to be given this opportunity, and I thank you most sincerely. So yes, this is Vai Aho o Te Ngangana Tokelau. I don't know if you were all aware of that. Tokelau and Language Week, and this is the proverb or the whakatauki for Tokelau and Language Week this week. Ke olatia ko ia tokelau I tana wakawai. Tokelau, to prosper within its foundation. And when I looked up what its foundation is, language, culture, customs and faith, which sits really well with our kaupapa tonight, because really this is about our tamariki, our rangatahi, having opportunity to bring all of who they are to their learning journey. And I really want to thank you for coming tonight to listen to me after many of you have been probably teaching all day. So I do want to acknowledge the kaiako in the room. You know, kaiako are so important to the journeys that our young people embark on in their atele. And I want to thank you for your openness tonight to hear the message. Please excuse my voice, I'm kind of getting over a head cold and hay fever. So, malo ni sambolivinaka, malo le soifua maua, malilangi e mama, malo e lei, whakalofa lahi atu, mihi nui kia koutou katoa. So, yes, I think I don't need to go into this because our kai kōrero explained that at the end of 2020 I left the university. Actually, I don't really see myself as an education researcher. I've always been a kaiako, a teacher. And so I taught for many years in the primary schooling sector, both here in Aotearoa, Porirua initially, all over the Manawatu, up in Tāmaki, over to Samoa for 9 years, back into Māngere 25 years ago, and that's where we still live and work. And you know, often it's just that these opportunities come about, and after being in Samoa, I went to university and kind of upskilled with my qualifications, and the doors opened there. And then at the end, as my brother mentioned, beginning of 2020, I began work with Tūhourangi, which has been a real privilege as well, seeing tauira grow in their knowledge of kaupapa Māori, underpinning their whole rangaho journey. So in this company, atele, we provide professional learning and development to kaiako and to leaders of ECE and of schooling, particularly in the area of Pacific education. So even though I'm Māori, it's kind of the doors have opened in the Pacific space for me. And so these are some of our current projects, the Pasifika Early Literacy Project, which is probably the main project I'm going to be talking to you about tonight, the findings from that project. The Pasifika Teacher Aid Project, which has been operating since 2005. These are ministry-funded projects, and I just really want to acknowledge some very dear sisters in the room tonight. Helena Arsiu, Rochelle Atherton, and Mele Tongiaso, who have been PTAC facilitators with me over many years as we've delivered PTAC to Waipounamu, and supported by Fuetanoa Seinafo and by Tufulasi Taleni. So just acknowledging those people here. Also want to acknowledge Professor Joe Fletcher, who's been a very dear colleague for many years working in this space as well. So, and finally, my cousin, Pauline Laufutu Simpson, actually married to one of my Fijian cousins. So isn't it awesome when you find these connections? Reo Moana is a project that we've been working on since 2022, a ministry-funded project supporting leaders and teachers in Pacific bilingual and immersion education. And we're currently just beginning work with two kura down here, so Te Komanua Rowley and also Te Waka Unua, which has been a real privilege as well to see the work that they're doing in the Pacific medium space, which is a growing space across our motu. Tamaiti o Te Moana is a project with Moana Connect around improving the before school check for Pacific learners. And then these are some of the other projects that we've been involved in, and also a future project next year is delivering tapasa in different regions across the motu. So I wonder if you'd be willing to try singing with me. That was just my little intro, but do you know this waiata? I chose it because it really reflects the kōrero tonight. Any of you know it? Oh, ka pai, let's waiata tātou. E mina ka ana taku wā ki te kaia te rangatira. Taku reo rangatira, taku kona mutuku iho. Miharo ke ana, miharo ke ana, ki tōna pakari kia ora. Te me meha, te wairua ki te kōrero mai. E mina ka ana taku waha ki te kaia te rangatira. Toku reo rangatira, taku kona mutuku iho. Miharo ke ana, ki tōna pakari kia ora. Te me meha, te wairua ki te kōrero mai. Kia kaha tātou ki te I kōrero mai. Oh, wei. Kia ora. Thank you. Well, that gives me a little bit of kaha now. Okay, I'm going to start with a story. And forgive me if you've heard this story before, but I think it's a good way to start. It's called The Monkey and the Fish. Anyone heard this story before? Well, a typhoon had temporarily stranded a monkey on an island in a secure, protected place. While waiting for the raging waters to recede, the monkey spotted a fish swimming against the current. It seemed obvious to the monkey that the fish was struggling and in need of assistance. Being of kind heart, the monkey resolved to help the fish. A tree precariously dangled over the very spot where the fish seemed to be struggling. At considerable risk to himself, the monkey moved far out on a limb, reached down and snatched the fish from the threatening waters. Immediately, scurrying back to the safety of his shelter, he carefully laid the fish on dry ground. For a few moments, the fish showed excitement, but soon settled into a peaceful rest. Joy and satisfaction swelled inside the monkey. He had successfully helped another creature. Just have a chat to your neighbour about any of these questions, very quickly. Okay, let's just come back together. So What do you think was the monkey's motivation? Genuinely wanted to help the fish. So why did the monkey take the fish out of the water? He did. He did make assumptions. So what did he assume? Yeah, he assumed that the fish was struggling. He actually assumed that fish culture was the same as monkey culture, didn't he? So what advice would you give the monkey in future situations where he'd like to help? Ask the fish, yeah? Or ask the fish's family? How does it relate to school? Yeah, I think that's a really good point. We have to know our tamariki and know our whānau and not make assumptions about them. No disrespect with this cartoon here, but I think it makes a good point. You've all worked hard so far, but to make one final decision as to your worth, one final test, you must all climb that tree. And so you can see who's going to do really well in that test. Yeah, and I think we need to critically examine not only curriculum, not only what we teach and how we teach, but how we assess and whose knowledge is privileged in assessment processes. And so I like this quote, everybody is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it is stupid. And you know, this was actually my mother's experience. She came here as a 12-year-old in 1946 on the Mātua. She came to live with the Pākehā family in Wellington, brought here by her older sister, who was 25, and she came as a fluent speaker of Fijian, but she was never allowed to use that language once she set foot on this whenua, either at home or at school. And she experienced a lot of language loss, a lot of pain, a lot of mamai. And, you know, she said the first day at school, the teacher said to her that he wanted her to write an essay. Well, she didn't even know what the word had meant. She had come from the country, from some savu. She hadn't even been to Suva. And so all her life, the legacy of school made her feel that she was not very clever. She said the kids just wanted her to sing and dance. And so actually she's a very clever person. She's 90 years old, she lives with me and my 4-generation whare, and she has enriched our lives so much. And she's written her life story for all of her mokopuna. You know, but school left its legacy with her. And so I think we need to think about this. Who has power in early learning and in schooling? Who has power in the public domains of Aotearoa New Zealand and the Pacific? Because who holds power is closely related to whose language is spoken in public language domains and whose knowledges, languages and literacies are valued in early learning and in schooling. And so Jim Cummins talked about the need to provide schools that created an environment for empowerment. And he defined empowerment as the collaborative creation of power. So he said that we might have bilingual tamariki in our kura. And you know, in Aotearoa New Zealand, what does the ministry call or label these tamariki? Anyone know the labels that we use for bilingual tamariki? Yes, ESOL learners, they're often called. What does ESOL stand for? Yeah, people think it's English speakers of other languages. It's not. It's English for speakers of other languages. It's something we do or provide. It's not a person. So please don't call them ESOL learners. What term does the ministry use? English language learner. I've been saying to the ministry for many years, why don't you call them bilingual learners or emergent bilinguals? In the bilingual education research field, the same learners that are labelled ESOL learners or English language learners in the second language acquisition or literacy field are named emergent bilinguals or bilingual learners in the bilingual field. They're the same learners that we're talking about. So why do you think I prefer this label rather than this label? Exactly. It focuses on what our tamariki bring with them rather than what they don't bring. And maybe you're sitting there thinking, yeah, well, that's all very well, but most of our tamariki no longer speak their languages. Do they live in Palangi homes? No, they don't. They come with a worldview, knowledges that are embedded in what it means to be Samoan or Tongan or a mix of many different ethnicities. And so we need to understand that bilingualism is a continuum. We might only have one or two kupu or formulaic chunks at one end of the continuum, the other end of the continuum near native-like proficiency. But we're all on a continuum of language learning, whatever our target languages are, whether they're Te Reo Māori or Ngangana Samoa or Vosavakaviti. And so Jim Cummins said, you can never understand the field of bilingualism and bilingual education without thinking about it through the lens of power, identity, ideology and politics. Relations of power are at the heart of schooling. The language of instruction is just one of many pedagogical factors leading to empowerment and affirmation of children's identities. So, I've got a quick fire quiz for you, and I'm only going to give you 1 to 2 minutes. Off you go, see how many of these questions you can answer. Pretty quiet. Let's start with the first one. Where did tangata whenua come from? Some say Cook Island. What do we as tangata whenua say where we came from? Hawaii. Hawaii. So where's Hawaii? Ai, Te Moana Nui a Kiwa, in multiple places in Te Moana Nui a Kiwa. Many of our waka launched from Rarotonga, from Titikaveka, but actually our waka had come from different islands and often launched from there as the final launching off point. And so we have that name, you know, and so one name for where we come from is Hawaii. Well, we could equally say Hawaii or Savaii. These are our Hawaii places. And so there's a little bit of detail there. We became Indigenous Māori, an Indigenous Māori world around the 15th century. So it took time to adapt to this whenua and this motu, to become Indigenous to this place. But that does not negate that we as tangata whenua are also tangata moana. We are part of the Indigenous peoples of the Pacific. And we in Aotearoa, New Zealand, are a Pacific nation. Yes, we're part of the Commonwealth, but before that, we were and are a Pacific nation. So, who claimed the Pacific? Oh, I didn't want to tell you that. The British Empire claimed the Pacific. Did any of you guess that? Yeah? What was the next one? Let me just see what the next one was. Which Pacific islands are part of the realm of New Zealand and are New Zealand citizens? Kapai, Niue, Cook Islands and Tokelau. Very good. Which Pacific nation was annexed by the United Kingdom in 1916 and put under the jurisdiction of New Zealand in 1925? Any other takers? Which Pacific nation was administered by New Zealand from 1914 to 1962? You must know this one. Samoa, yeah? So it's interesting that a lot of us don't know our Pacific history. Why is that? Because we weren't taught it in schools. Pretty, yeah.
The French had a good as well.
Yes.
Yeah, so like we're talking about New Caledonia.
Yes.
And also they had a really good attempt on New Zealand.
Yes.
Which is why the British came back and wanted to protect the indigenous people. So there was the French in the Pacific too.
Yeah, and our Polynesian whānau, Hawaii in the north, Rapa Nui in the east, Aotearoa in the southwest, that's what's often called the Polynesian Triangle or whānau. We've been carved up by colonial powers. I wouldn't necessarily say the British Empire wanted to protect us. It was about claiming the Pacific and its resources for these different empires. And so, you know, we are connected through our indigenous whakapapa with French Polynesia, and yet we've been separated by our post-colonial languages. Anyway, why did I do that? Because I wanted to share with you that often we are products of our own education experience, and we were never taught these things in schools. And it's great now that we have the Aotearoa New Zealand Histories Project to teach us our own history, because we teach what we value. And, you know, I think this is all part of our identity as a nation as well. So I just wanted to really acknowledge and pay tribute to Emeritus Professor Graham Nuthall. I've been really enjoying his book. Thank you, Jill. And, you know, I just think he had some wonderful, deep thinking that, you know, I think if you went to Teachers College when I did, you will remember his name and what he taught us back in those years. But I think it's a book that's well worth everybody having another read of. And look what he said here. Why do we create tests that produce numbers or percentiles or grades based on numbers? The answer lies in an old and outdated belief about the nature of knowledge. This belief holds that knowledge can be broken down into little bits, like knowing how to spell individual words or knowing single arithmetical facts. It is then possible to count the number of words a child spells correctly or the number of number facts that child reproduces. If all knowledge and ability can indeed be broken down in this way, it makes sense to have tests that allow us to count how much a student knows. Provided we know which words and number facts are in the test, we still carry this belief around with us. But significant knowledge and ability aren't like this. It is not possible to break knowledge and ability up into little bits. Significant knowledge is about what we ourselves believe about the physical and social world and how we interact with it. Such knowledge, of course, contains bits of information, but at the deeper and lasting levels of understanding and meaning, it is seamless. So it's pretty amazing that Graham was talking like this, you know, many, many years ago. And in some ways, I think our education environment has become even more of a contested space, particularly in light of our election results a couple of weeks ago. And so I think you've probably read the abstract for this, but in the abstract I also quoted Graham and Adrian Alton Lee from their 1987 article titled "Take Your Brown Hands Off My Book." And way back then they were arguing that we need to study dominant culture classrooms to understand the complexities of the processes which promote racism. So I hope that this talk today, in some ways I'm probably preaching to the converted in the room, but I hope that this talk tonight will help you to think even more deeply about your classroom and what goes on in your classroom. Just like Graham's work did, he found, you know, his book, The Hidden Lives of Learners, showed us that learners lived in a whole other world that the kaiako was often very unaware of. So, look at what they say here. The overt and covert ways in which an education system is monocultural and discriminatory need to be identified so that effective change can be wrought. Michael Apple identifies two important components of the hidden curriculum in the tacit teaching of norms and values that goes on in the routines and institutional context of schooling and in the nature of educational knowledge. He argues that the hidden curriculum of educational knowledge can be located in where the knowledge comes from, whose knowledge it is, and what social groups it supports. And they go on here to talk about, rather than calling it the hidden curriculum, perhaps we could use the more dynamic notion of a lived culture of the school. And that's a good question to ask yourselves. What is the lived culture of your schools? What is valued in the lived culture of your schools? Whose knowledge, ways of being, and valued knowledges and worldviews are apparent and obvious in what is taught and how it's taught? So, how might kaiako create and normalise linguistically and culturally sustaining learning spaces? Linguistically just refers to language. So we've often just talked about culturally responsive. That doesn't really go far enough. We need to create environments that privilege Indigenous knowledges, Pacific knowledges, so that that becomes part of the valued knowledge of schooling. And in that way, it can become culturally sustaining. Why do we need that? Because we're all products of colonisation. We've all experienced language loss, culture loss. And so really it is the responsibility of schools now to give back some of which was taken. So I loved Graham's four premises or criteria or signs of effective teaching. He said his first premise was that students learn what they do. What they do in the classroom, day after day, is what they learn and become expert in. The second premise, social relationships determine learning. A really important consideration. He talked about the peer culture, but I would also argue we need to think about our tamariki nested in whānau and community, and whether we're really enacting genuine two-way knowledge sharing with our communities, reciprocal partnership. The third premise, effective activities are built around big questions. Spend time and resources on designing and carrying out meaningful classroom activities, which often means covering less of the curriculum and making sure that the outcomes are really important in the lives and interests of the students. And his fourth premise was that effective activities are managed by the students themselves. So focus on major questions or problems significant in their lives and cultures, engaging them in intellectual work and breaking big questions down into smaller, manageable chunks. So, you know, we can learn a lot still from Graham's work all those years ago. And of course, this connects very strongly with our new curriculum, Te Mātai Aho. And here we have Te Mātai Tipu, or the vision for young people. Have you all had a look at it? What does it say? We are strong in our identities, languages, cultures and values so that we can confidently carry who we are wherever we go. And who wrote this? It was written by rangatahi. Here they are. All the names of the rangatahi on the ministry's youth advisory group who wrote that vision statement. This is what they want out of their schooling experience. It also comes through in our common practice model. A culturally responsive and sustaining pedagogical approach values and builds on the knowledges, values, languages, cultures, identities, whānau communities, lived experiences and whakapapa of akonga. So, and it makes a very good point here, relating back to what I talked about earlier. Power is at the heart of schooling. And we need to think about who holds power in our classrooms. So now I'm just going to very quickly share a little bit, not only from my own story, but also from some of our project work. And so this is one of my favourite whakatauki, kia whakatō muri, te haere whakamua. I walk backwards into the future with my eyes fixed on the past. What does that mean? It means we always remember what has come before, because that helps us to walk into the future knowing who we are and where we've come from and what we're building on. And so my colleague, Professor Janet Gaffney, she referred to the period between 1962 and 1989 as the golden age in literacy teaching in Aotearoa. I don't know if I necessarily agree entirely with her, but there was certainly some incredible things that happened during that period. And she said that the golden years were building up in the 50s. And so she was seeking to understand all these connections across the system at that time. If you're as old as I am and you were teaching back in the 70s and 80s, you'll remember some of these partnerships that were very strong at the time. Well, I lived through the golden age of literacy teaching and learning, as possibly some of you did. So, do you remember this? I went to school in 1965, and I remember those books, Janet and John. This is Janet, this is John. And you know what? I couldn't read. Year 1, well, it wasn't year 1 then, it was Primer 1, Primer 2, Primer 3. I didn't learn to read until Primer 3. Why was that? I just could not connect with those books. I don't really remember my parents reading to me, but they told me lots of stories. They were great storytellers. Our bedtime stories were the stories of my father growing up on the farm at Tokomaru, and my mother growing up on a coconut plantation in Samsavu. Those were our bedtime stories, but not a whole lot of book reading. And I didn't connect with those books. They didn't look like me or my whānau, and I didn't get it. So this was what, well, actually I looked this up today, and it said after the books fell out of fashion, they became a target for ridicule on the basis of their stilted diction and overwhelmingly middle-class content. So this was what I looked like at that time. But in Primer 3, I had this marvellous teacher who gave me books that had meaning to me and that I connected with, and I learned to read. And that was what I looked like then. And so school became a very happy place. So I'm sure you all remember this too. Yeah? Father is here, Sally is here, come to breakfast, Bill, come to breakfast, Peter, said mother. Well, my sister, actually it wasn't reading recovery because reading recovery hadn't started then, but she remembers being pulled out of the class by a teacher to read. And she couldn't work out the word beginning with M. The teacher said, well, who makes your breakfast in the morning? She replied, oh, my sister. She states, to this day, I still feel the trauma of getting it so wrong. But actually, what point are we making there? Kaya ko kia tūpato. Be careful about assumptions around how whānau operate. I was the tuakana. I got up and I looked after my teina, my little sister. I got up and I made the breakfast and I looked after her. You know, so sometimes those books didn't connect quite right either. So I grew up in Orongomai, Apaha. That's where I was born, and I grew up in Kapahaka. That, in many ways, that was a stronger learning environment for me than being at school. But actually our Kapahaka was brought into our school as well. So it was before Matatini, it was the beginnings of the urban marae movement. It was in the days when Māwai Hakona used to battle it out with Ngāti Pōneke. We were Māwai Hakona, and see all those cups in the front row, I'm holding one of them. You know, that was where I learned to stand on a stage and perform through waiataringa, through haka, through poi. That was where I learned those wonderful literacy skills. And there I am. So, then I went to Wellington Teachers College in 1978, straight from the sixth form, and I was immersed in Māori studies, it was called, and Pacific studies. I majored in tikanga Māori, Pacific Studies and drama. Those were the three things I majored in. Can't do that these days. But what a wonderfully rich time it was at Wellington Teachers College with Amster Reedy, Tipene O'Regan, Kiri Ka, Liz Hunkin, and our kapahaka tuat, the whole motu. And it was a very rich time to be at Teachers College. And so, you know, it was the time of taha Māori. But actually there was a lot more going on in English medium education with te reo Māori at the time than in some ways there was at later times. And so, you know, these embodied literacies, kapahaka, waiataringa, haka, poi, even our arts practice, ko whaiwhai, tukutuku, we need to expand our notions of what we mean by literacy. We now no longer talk about literacy, we talk about literacies. And we even talk about embodied literacies and connecting these with the valued literacy of schooling. And so probably it's no surprise that I'm doing this work that I do today, because it has been built from my tupuna, from my mātua, from my parents, and all my experiences from those I've learnt from over the years. That's my 21st actually. Then in 1982, I met this Samoan in the Air Force. He was in the Air Force. So that's why I went and taught up around the Manawatu. We were at Ohakea. And, you know, in those days when I first started teaching in Porirua, I had a day a week to go and continue my ātarangi journey. Tikanga Māori and te reo Māori was really pushed in those days. And then, of course, in 1989, we moved to Samoa, where I established a school there. My husband was pastoring a church, and here are some of our tamariki, where every year we would have a big drama production, which really showcased our cultures. So in 1989, we went to Samoa with 2 tamariki, and in 1998, we came back with 5 tamariki. So it was a very busy time, but these are just, you know, these are all the experiences that have contributed to the work that I'm doing today. So when we came back, we built our home in South Auckland in Māngere, and I went to teach at the local school. There were 3 things that I noticed having left in 89 and coming back in 98, 3 things that seemed to have disappeared: creativity, fun, and te reo Māori. You remember it was the time of Tomorrow's Schools, and government funding for te reo Māori then shifted to kura kaupapa Māori, rightfully so, but then English medium education was given very little to support Māori within that space. So here we are on our last Sunday in Samoa, and now I'm the shortest. So, remembering those who have come before, Sylvia Ashton Warner, who taught Māori children to read by telling their own stories that were then put into print and became their reading material. Their literacies were nested in their life experiences. You know, the faculty that I worked at for 15 years in Tāmaki, the library is called the Sylvia Ashton Warner Library. And yet we have many young kaiako today who have no idea who Sylvia Ashton Warner was and how remarkable she was and how internationally renowned she was. And, you know, she talked about a child's first words, and a child's first literacies must be made out of the stuff of the child itself. She talked about reaching a hand into their mind, bringing out a handful of the stuff I find there, and using that as our first working material. And this dynamic material, within the familiarity and security of it, the Māori finds that words have intense meaning to him, from which cannot help but arise a love of reading. So reading was connected deeply with Māori tamariki lived experiences and lives. And then, of course, Elwyn Richardson. Do any of you remember him? He was an advisor in the ministry, in the Department of Education, but prior to that, he was a teacher in a little Māori school up north. And he had a developmental approach, and central in his approach was that idea that children can move between one expressive medium and another. So he was, an arts advisor, but the learning that he encouraged with those tamariki was all hands-on learning. And if you haven't seen the film, The Heart of the Matter, look it up. It's about his work and the legacy that he left. So it was no surprise that we taught the way we did back in the early 80s in Porirua, where we grew tadpoles into frogs and eggs into chickens, and we went all over the place on trips outside of the school. It was very much learning within the environment and integration across the curriculum. Of course it wasn't perfect, but it was informed by the legacy of people like Graham Nuthall, Elwyn Richardson, Sylvia Ashton Warner. So this also connects to Graham's second premise: social relationships determine learning. As Māori and Pacific peoples, we seek to make connections that are nested in pūrākau, or ancient stories, or co-constructed stories that are recognised as embodied literacies or cultural practices that can then be connected to world literacies or the literacies of the curriculum. So I'm not saying, well, we no longer do English reading and writing. Of course we do, but we connect much more with those genres or text purposes or types of English reading and writing by opening up the linguistic space and allowing our tamariki to connect their embodied literacies with those literacies of schooling. So this is this idea of transforming schooling, and I believe we're all in the business of doing that, transforming schooling. And I've been a teacher for many years. I know it's not always easy, but I just want to say kia kaha, whamalosi, continue in the good work you are doing every day at the chalk face. You are preparing our future citizens, and what will they look like? Much of what they look like will be a product of what they've learnt at school. And so this whakatauki, tā te tamariki, tāna mahi wā, wahi taha. It's the job of the tamariki to smash the calabash. And so, the taha stands for tipuna rules and tikanga. Children were expected to explore the boundaries and break some rules. So, for me, when I think of a taha, I think of my father telling me the story of Rona and the moon, and being at Mawai Hakona, and singing that mōteatea about Rona, the story of Rona, how she was walking along in the night, and te marama going behind the clouds, and her swearing at the moon, calling him a pōkoko hua, a cooked head, and of course marama coming down and taking her up into the sky. And so, we all sing. Do you all remember this waiata? It comes from Mawai Hakona. Tā koto ana au I te mō i ngā huri huri tū ake au. Te tiro ki te atarau kei rungara. Te marama e whiti ana te rā rona. Kei rotora. Piri ki te taha, piri ki te ngai o au era. E rona e. Au e rona e. So that waiata tells the story of Rona. So even though at that time, as a tamaiti, I couldn't write it, I couldn't read it, but I could tell the story and I could sing the waiata that told the story, and I could do the waiataringa. And so, we need to think about that. Graham's third premise, effective activities are built around big questions. How do people's interactions with the natural world, te whenua, te moana, impact themselves and te ao? And so we can connect in with Rona and what we can learn from that pūrākau, and we can expand across all of the areas of the curriculum in asking and answering these big questions. giving value to family literacies as much as we give value to English literacy. So, in the Pasifika Early Literacy Project, we have some really good examples of this. And it's all very well me talking about it, but just to finish, I want to share with you some little examples. We have so many. So this was a ministry contract that began in 2014. Actually, I wrote the research brief for it with my colleague Gleaned Price from Canterbury. And then in 2014 it went up for tender. We tendered for it and we won the contract, and it's been operating since then. The Ministry of Education provides support for 5 Pacific languages, and there they are there. Ngangana Samoa, Leo Whakatonga, Reo Māori Kuki Airani, Ngangana Tokelau, Ngahau Niue, not Vasa Wakamiti. There's reasons for that. It's to do with our shared histories, and I don't have time to go into it. MPP, of course. Oh. Shall I unplug it and put it back in? Try again. Disappeared. Very strange. Can we put it on yours? Plug it in. Sorry about this, everybody. Showing here, but it's not showing up there. Anyway, I'll just carry on talking until he can sort it for us. My apologies about that. I'm not sure why that's happening. Let's go back to where I was. How are we going? 6:30. Are you okay if I keep going? Yeah? All right. So I was just about to share with you some findings from the Pasifika Early Literacy Project. Let's just move it along. The problem might be that my laptop's getting too old. The wire. Okay, let's go back to where we were. Nearly, I won't keep you for too much longer. So, the Pasifika Early Literacy Project uses Pacific dual language books as catalysts to support kaiako in opening up the linguistic space of the classroom. Initially, we began with years 0 to 2 kaiako. It's now been opened up to the early learning services sector as well. And in fact, that's enriched our work because ECE and the way that they have a broad notion of what literacies are has impacted our understanding of that in the Pasifika Early Literacy Project. So this is straight from the website. You can Google Pasifika Early Literacy Project or Pasifika Dual Language Books. There's one site under Te Whāriki that has the primary books, and there's one site, sorry, Te Whāriki has the ECE books, the primary books are under TKI, Te Kiti Purangi. So 5 languages as I mentioned. Here are some of the primary books. You can order these from down the back of the chair. They are freely available to you if you're not aware of them. I would suggest you also order the ECE books. We've told the publishers they're a bit too complex for ECE level tamariki. They tell good stories, and so many ECE kaiako are reading the pictures and making those connections with tamariki in that way. In PELP, we focus on multi-layered power sharing, and these are just some of the multiple layers that power is shared. We co-design with communities, with kaiako, with school leaders, and we encourage kaiako and leaders to begin to privilege Pacific knowledges and languages within their learning spaces, particularly within that early literacy space. So it's anchored in the notion of heart languages. So for us, you know, even if we are not fully fluent in our Pacific languages, they are still the languages of our heart. You know, there are things that we can express in Te Reo Māori and in our Pacific languages that cannot always be readily translated into English. One of my daughter's names is Aroha. You know, her name was so mispronounced throughout her schooling. But that name is and that word is a very deep word that has become very commonplace in some ways, misused in some ways. So we agree with Simonson, who argue that we need to take a broad view of literacies as modes of communication, conceptualization, and meaning making. Children may also draw on more than one heritage or family language, including various registers of English. So if your tamariki come to school and they are speakers of Samoan English, or Tongan English, or Māori English, those are valid linguistic registers if they are used for communicative purposes in their whānau. We need to treat them with as much respect as we would the register of schooling. So school English is one of many Englishes. It's not the only English. We need to make connections across all of our Englishes and all of our languages in order for learning to become more meaningful. So we call these our Pacific Heart languages, sometimes expressed through oratory, storying, memorising text, reciting metaphors, proverbs, Bible verses. Many of our tamariki are very good at memorisation and recitation from their church literacy practices. Interpretation of dreams, waiata, song, dance, haka, tatau. That word tatau is where tattoo comes from. The early sailors took that word back. Ngatu or masi or tapa, tukutuku ko whaiwhai. All these arts practices are forms of literacies. So, a big underpinning ethos of PELP is sharing our own stories that connect with the story in the book. Connecting with Graham's second premise, social relationships determine learning. So here I am in Samoa with 3 of my tamariki in our old school, and here our tamariki are making their own fun, using a bottle as their rugby ball to kick it over the goalposts. You know, so the way we get ready for school in Samoa is very different to the way we get ready for school here. And there are 2 of the dual language books that talk about that process. So another little piece is this idea of siva or waiataringa, or particularly we use the notion of Samoan siva as an embodied literacy. So this was during COVID actually, where we did a siva that told the story of this text, fishing, o le whongotanga, is it whangotanga? Yeah, whangotanga. And so, you know, all of the kaiako that were in the room that day were retelling that story of fishing through siva. So it's not that this replaces book reading, but it enhances our experiences of book reading. This book is a story about Tono's talo garden and how he plants a talo garden with his grandfather. And so this story was used by a Pālangi teacher in a school in Māngere, and she was not a speaker of Tongan, but she was willing to share power with the tamariki in the room who did speak Tongan. So, you know, this requires kaiako to be willing not to know everything that's being said in the classroom, which also connects with Graham's work. You know, but this is actually thinking about, well, these children are using a language and I don't understand everything they're saying. Am I going to trust them that it's focused on what we're doing? You know, so they reenacted the story with one of the children assuming the role of the language teacher. So the kaiako became the learner and the teacher was the child, a 5 or 6 year old child. And so they shared this video with the children's families. So what was key to this was that they had a Tongan teacher aide or learning assistant who was fluent in Tongan, who supported the tamariki to not only read the Tongan version of the book, but then to plant their own talo garden using Tongan as the reo to support them to do that. So here's the video and let's hope it works.
Oku tofi a whaeleni ai talo. If you don't know what that means here, I'll tell you. Whaeleni is cutting talo. Oku keli a esela ai luo. If you don't know what that means here, I'll tell you again. I am digging a hole. Oku toku kiloto ai talo a eseta ke luo. If you don't know what that means here, I will tell you. And Santa is putting the talo inside the hole. Oku talo a oweni ai lu. If you don't know what that means, here, I'll tell you. Owen is catching the dirt down.
So the child was the expert in that digital product, and the kaiako was the learner. But to enable that to happen, the teacher was willing to share power. She was a remarkable teacher, and that was just one example. So, you know, this is what Patricia Grace says. If books do not do these things, do not reinforce values, actions, customs, culture, and identity, then they are dangerous. If there are no books that tell us about ourselves but only tell us about others, then they are saying you do not exist, and that is dangerous. However, if there are books that are about you and they are untrue, that is very dangerous. If there are books about you but they are negative and insensitive so that they are saying you are not good, that is dangerous. So, this is an example of a child drawing on prior knowledge with action verbs. I like to move it, move it. I like to move it. And another one here, kind of just a little aside to the phonics area. My 5-year-old students are learning to read. Yesterday, one of them pointed to a picture in a zoo book and said, "Look at this, it's a freaking elephant." I took a deep breath and said, "What did you call it?" "It's a freaking elephant. It says so on the picture." And so it does. So, I love this quote here from Maya, Selena, and Melinda and Rebecca, where they say, "Mā te rongo ka mohio, mā te mohio ka marama, mā te marama ka mātou, mā te mātou ka ora." Through resonance comes awareness. Through awareness comes understanding. Through understanding comes knowledge. Through knowledge we flourish. Children are inherently and inheritedly literate. They are born literate, inheritors of multiple and cumulative genealogies of multimodal communication and knowledge sharing. So, you know, I really want to thank you tonight for pronouncing my name correctly. I've done a keynote at maybe 4 different conferences or places in the last 2 months, and at every one my name was pronounced wrong or spelt wrong. Si ilata, I get siliata, I get si iliata. But these boys, and connecting very much with Graham's fourth premise, effective activities are managed by the students themselves. These boys at Bishop Viard College in Porirua got fed up with people pronouncing their names wrong. And so they created their own website where they teach people how to pronounce Pacific names correctly. Pretty innovative, isn't it? Meaningful, deep learning. And they created their own resource. You know, this book always resonates with so many of our communities when we share it. They all say, that's my story. My name was mispronounced at school, or my name was changed at school. And, you know, a lot of them have a lot of emotion about it. You know, when I went to Kiribati for the university in 2018, this is what it said on the Director's Office of USP. USP is an English-speaking campus. We request everyone to speak in English on campus. Please speak English if you enter this room. What message is that giving to those students? Education is only about English. You know, that thinking is still alive and well in many of our community. You know, they need to hear from you, our educators, that your languages are absolutely essential to your children's success at school. And so my doctoral work went into this in great detail around what is effective practice for Pasifika learners. I used the dimensions of effective practice and developed specific dimensions. And each dimension was connected to a part of the atele. So I don't have time to go into that now. You can look it up and read. I've written articles about it. You can read more about that. Yosua Esera's principal at Sutton Park School in Mangere, he's retiring this year, but his master's study compared the English proficiency of Samoan students in Samoan bilingual classes with the English proficiency of Samoan students in English medium classes. Do you know what he found out? Samoan students in Samoan bilingual education had higher levels of English proficiency than those in English medium education who were supposedly getting higher doses of English. You know, it almost doesn't seem to make sense. You think if you get more English, you should be better at it. But actually it's the opposite. The bilingual research all over the world shows that tamariki will reach academic grade H norms and exceed them if they are in bilingual education long enough. 6 years to meet them, 8 years to exceed them. If we measure them against English-only standards from years 1 to 5, they will be below standard because it's a monolingual standard. So, you know, we need to think about our assessment practices. I won't go into translanguaging because time's going now, but it's just about opening up that linguistic space in English medium education. Here's some ideas around how to translanguage in your classroom. We need to integrate across the input and output modes: listening, reading, viewing, speaking, writing, presenting. We need to build from oracy to literacy to embodiment of what we are communicating, both in text and through our bodies, through presenting. We need to create multimodal texts in 2 or more languages rather than in English only. You know, privilege our languages and literacies in the schooling space. And we need to integrate content learning across the curriculum that also connects with all of our deal. I'll just move on. I think you've probably got that message pretty loud and clear, that when we make space, we value these cultural practices as inseparable from the literacies children enact to communicate and create meaning. So we've written about this in an international publication, The Reading Teacher, and it's open access. If you want to hear more about it, you can download the article. It's a pretty easy read. There it is. So just to finish, this is actually a teacher in the pilot year. I don't know if you can hear that.
With your bag. What else did a sound file? saying on your sound file? That's our play button. What were you saying on your sound file? There's a video too. Can we sing our sentence? Because you guys were awesome at this before. Ready? Olo'u ato a onga lea. Here is my bag. Fantastic. So we've got a, because Mrs. Roberts has been practicing at home. Okay, yes, Mrs. Roberts has been practicing at home.
Are you Sam?
No,
Are you Samoan?
because even though we're teachers, yeah, even though I'm a teacher, I don't stop learning either. I have to go home and do homework too, okay?
English.
Fantastic.
Because you're from England.
I am from England, yes.
And you're English.
I am English. So we've got our photo of you with our bags, we've got our sound file reading the
So the
sentence.
children started to create their own digital products in Samoan and in English. These were 5-year-olds, brand new ones. And I'll just play this a little bit longer before I start.
Okay, so do you maybe need to record that one again if you can't really hear it? What do you think?
Yeah, so the last exemplar or example I'll share with you is from another teacher, only shared with me this week actually. And she talked again about a Tongan boy who struggled to read in English and was reluctant to read in Tongan. I showed him the dual language books. He picked up the book, flicked through the pages and started reading some of the words in Tongan. I sent the book home and his family dramatised the story by having each family member act as a character. He came back to school buzzing because he rewrote the story using his own words. When I asked the questions about the book in English, he was quick to answer them, even though it was in Tongan, but he understood the context of the book. He was able to transfer his knowledge from Tongan to English using the translanguaging approach help. So I was going to play you this, but it's not actually working here. So this was his digital product, completely in Tongan, where he told this story, and she gave me the translation. We speak Tongan at home. My mother speaks the Tongan language to us. Our dad speaks to us in Tongan. There's a Tongan Bible and other Tongan books at home. My grandmother reads Tongan stories to me. I enjoy reading Tongan stories. This from a boy who was really disengaged prior to this. Finally, this is from a year 13 student at Sir Edmund Hillary Collegiate from her Tongan class. They went to Te Papa and they gave some of their own objects, and she actually gave her Toby's seafood uniform because it was very meaningful for her. She talked about how she was hurting when she saw how her parents struggled to put food on the table, and so she decided to get a part-time job while she was still at school. And she just writes here about what she learnt from there. So here she writes all about it in English. We don't have time to read it all. But if you read that last couple of lines, on reflection, having a part-time job was a great opportunity because it helped me to support my family, and no one can take that away from me. Last but not least, I strongly believe that talent and experience is one thing, but persistence and trusting in the Lord is everything. So connecting our literacies with our spiritual worldviews as well. And here, of course, she's written it in Lea Whakatonga as well. Fully bilingual, biliterate, valued at school as much as at home. And here she is, beautiful young woman. And so I was going to share some of these teacher reflections with you from the last year and just recently, but I don't think we have time. I just want to finish now. Some greedy cat stories in Samoan. And just finally, space making. Language, culture and embodied literacies are intertwined. When we reconceptualise literacies, families are the source of young children's languages, knowledges, ways of being and identities. In PELP, teachers have been given space to pause and notice children's cultural literacies. Teachers in any context can choose to make space for the languages, cultures and embodied literacies of all children, not just Pacific, as they share power with families. systemic privileging of monocultural English-only print literacy restricts teachers and children, and I believe system change is needed. So if you want to hear more about this kind of thinking, we updated this book for the ministry in the last year or so, working with English language learners. They wouldn't change the title. I wanted working with emergent bilinguals, webs, not wells, but anyway. And, you know, there's 10 modules in there. Although it's for learning assistance, it's effective ESOL pedagogy, bilingual pedagogy for kaiako as well. And I was going to play you the intro video, but I think you can find that online if you're interested. So, yeah, it's this idea of transforming our schools. And you as kaiako are key to that. We need to critically examine what we define as success. We need to develop strong theorised leadership and pedagogical approaches in English medium, Māori medium and Pacific medium spaces. So, you know, just finished with Emeritus Professor Graham Nuthall. These were his 6 key points in his book, The Hidden Curriculum. Design learning activities with students' memories in mind. Engage students in activities that enable them to revisit concepts. Monitor individual students' evolving understandings of concepts. Focus on big questions. Capitalise on peer culture to foster learning. Over time, encourage students to manage their own learning activities. Probably you're looking at those and thinking, oh yeah, tick, tick, yeah, I do all that, I do all that. Wasn't he remarkable to have written about this all those years ago? And yet we're still mastering much of it. For me, it's about this boy and my other mokopuna. 3 mokopuna arriving this year, 1 in January, 1 in March and 1 in December. In fact, my son and his wife are flying from Samoa right now, coming to give birth here. And so, mokopuna, mokopuna. Everybody say mokopuna. Mokopuna is moko's the facial tatau, puna's a pool. Our mokopuna are the pool in which we see ourselves reflected. That's my mokopuna, Kanava Milo Toloa. And on the other side is when I was a baby. He's quite like me, which I'm pretty happy about. So, when we look at our mokopuna, we see the reflection of ourselves. But what will they look like? Not just externally, but internally. That's a question we have to ask our whānau. Will your tamariki look like you? Will they be speakers, readers and writers of your language? Will they know about your valued cultural literacies, spiritual knowledges, things that are important to your whānau? In order for that to happen, we have to make space for those things within the valued knowledge of schooling. Thank you very much for listening for so long.
Tēnā koutou te whānau, ko Joss Nuthall toko ingoa. Yes, I'm a Nuthall. No relation. But I did know Graham, and from time to time we would share a joke about being asked if we were related to each other. And it's my privilege on behalf of the faculty, Graham's family, and all of us gathered here tonight to thank Rae on your behalf. Rae, thank you for sharing the richness of your scholarship with us and the richness of the projects that you're leading. And I could hear some bubbling comments behind me, and I think I would summarise those as saying, I really want to acknowledge the deep respect that you have shown for Graham's scholarship this evening. You've asked questions that were close to the heart of Graham's work. You asked, what do our tamariki bring to school? You asked, who has power in the classroom? You asked, how do we privilege what children already know? And particularly you asked a great question, how do we privilege Pacific languages? Rae, I want to thank you for the time that you've devoted to preparing for this evening. I appreciate and know how long you must have spent to put that marvellous material together, and to also acknowledge the time that you've spent travelling and the time that you've spent away from your whānau as they are drawing close to you in Auckland. So thank you for the work that you do. More power to you in the work that you do, the work that you do to make classrooms genuine learning spaces for all learners. Kia ora. Can I just say, as a parting moment, there's lots of kai left over. I had a little chat with the staff here at the venue, and you're very welcome to help yourself to kai on your way out the door. Take it home. Not only could it be dinner, it could be tomorrow's school lunches. Atamari. Paul Marty.
Kia ora Rae te whānau, nei te mihi atu ki a kōtou. So it's up to me to close our session tonight. Now, however, I've got two things for you, Ray. The first is sitting up the back there's a fellow called Sam Mano, who's an ex-Air Force person from around the same era as your husband. If you want to know anything, I'm sure Sam can tell you. That's the first thing. The second thing is a little bit about your kōrero, and Rereata Makiha always says that Western science always tries to pull things apart, whereas Indigenous sciences always try to see things as a whole. And you touched on that earlier on in your kōrero, so thank you very much for that. So what I'd like to do, fortunately it was Fijian Language Week a couple of weeks ago, and I happened to learn a Fijian himene, which I'd like to offer as part of our closing, and to acknowledge your Fijian whakapapa and your mum. So we'll have a waiata, and then I'll close with karakia, and then that's us whānau. You go and help yourselves to that kai that's out there. So, apologies in advance for mispronunciations. I'm just trying to do this off the top of my head. Eda sanganga, eda sanganga, ena vuku nidra, keina no na vosa, eda sanganga. Kia tau ki a tātou katoa, te atu whai o tō tātou are ki a ihu karaiti, me te aroha o te atua me te whiwhinga tahitanga ki te wairua tapu. Ake, 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 āmine, pōmārie.